a mysterious stranger saves a woman from a robbery in the dead of night, and they find something greater in their lives. Tonight, we're diving into the heart of the untamed American frontier, where survival depends on quick draws and quicker thinking. In a forgotten town where justice comes from the barrel of a gun, a woman's desperate fight for survival crosses paths with a mysterious stranger carrying secrets as heavy as the iron on his hip. Before we begin, if you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. The dusty streets of Millbrook lay silent under a crescent moon, casting long shadows between the weathered buildings that lined the main thoroughfare. This forgotten corner of Arizona territory had seen better days, when the silver mines still produced, and when hope hadn't yet dried up like the creek that once ran behind the general store. Margaret Maggie O'Brien pulled her shawl tighter as she hurried down the wooden sidewalk, her worn boots clicking against the planks. The 26-year-old schoolteacher had stayed late at the schoolhouse again, grading papers by candlelight, until her eyes burned. Living alone since her father's death 6 months ago, she'd grown accustomed to these solitary walks home, but tonight felt different. The usual sounds of the saloon had died down unusually early, and an unsettling quiet hung in the air like dust after a windstorm. As she turned the corner toward her small house at the edge of town, 3 figures emerged from the shadows between Murphy's Hardware and the abandoned barber shop. Maggie's heart lurched as she recognized them, the Donovan brothers, notorious for their drinking and worse for their treatment of women. Jake, the eldest, stepped into the moonlight, his yellowed teeth visible in a predatory grin. Well, if it ain't the pretty schoolma'am," Jake drawled, his words slurred with whiskey. "Out mighty late, ain't ya, Miss O'Brien?" Maggie clutched her leather satchel closer to her chest. "Please, let me pass. I just want to go home." "Oh, we ain't stopping ya," said Tommy, the middle brother, as he moved to block her path. "But maybe you could spare some time for us poor, lonely fellas." The youngest, Billy, circled behind her, cutting off any chance of retreat. Maggie's mouth went dry as she realized how isolated this stretch of road was. The nearest house belonged to old Mrs. Henderson, who was nearly deaf and went to bed with the sun. "I don't have any money," Maggie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please, just let me go." Jake laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the empty buildings. "Money? Who said anything about money?" He stepped closer, and Maggie could smell the stale whiskey and tobacco on his breath. "A pretty thing like you's got other ways to pay for safe passage." Terror shot through Maggie as Jake reached for her arm. She jerked backward, stumbling into Billy, who grabbed her shoulders with rough hands. Her satchel fell to the dirt, papers scattering in the night breeze. "Please," she cried out, but her voice seemed to disappear into the vast darkness of the frontier night. That's when the sound of spurs chinking against stone cut through the air like a blade. "Evening, gentlemen." The voice was low, controlled, and carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd faced death and lived to tell about it. All 4 heads turned toward the saucer, tall figure standing at the far end of the street, bathed in shadow except for the silver glint of the gun belt around his waist. Jake squinted into the darkness. "This ain't your business, stranger. Move along." The figure stepped forward into a patch of moonlight, revealing a man in his early 30s, with weathered features and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of old sorrows. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and a thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. He wore a long, dusty coat over simple clothes, and his hand rested casually near the grip of a well-maintained Colt revolver. "Seems to me like the lady wants to be left alone," the stranger said, his voice carrying the hint of a southern drawl. "Might be best if you boys headed back to wherever you came from." Tommy laughed nervously. "You hear this, Jake? This drifter thinks he can tell us what to do in our own town." But Jake was studying the stranger more carefully, noting the easy way he stood, the confidence in his posture. Men who wore their guns like that were usually men who knew how to use them. If you're enjoying the story so far, a quick like would mean a lot and help support the channel. "Like I said," Jake repeated, but with less conviction, "this ain't your affair." The stranger's eyes never left Jake's face, but his attention seemed to encompass all 3 brothers simultaneously. "Ladies got a right to walk the streets without being bothered. That makes it everyone's affair." Maggie found her voice. "Please," she whispered. "I just want to go home." The stranger nodded slightly. "Then home you'll go, Miss. These gentlemen were just leaving." For a moment, the tableau held 4 people frozen in a deadly dance, where the wrong move could mean blood spilled on the dusty street. The wind picked up, rattling a loose shutter somewhere in the distance. Billy, nervous and young, made the first mistake. His hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. The stranger's gun cleared leather in a movement so fluid it seemed like magic, the barrel pointing directly at Billy's chest before the young man's fingers had even touched his weapon's grip. "I wouldn't," the stranger said quietly. Jake raised his hand slowly. "Easy now, mister. We don't want no trouble." "Then there won't be any." The stranger's gun never wavered. "But the lady walks away unmolested. Tonight and every night." Tommy took a step back. "Come on, Jake. She ain't worth getting shot over." Jake's face burned with humiliation. But he wasn't stupid enough to draw on a man who'd already proven he could outdraw any of them. "This ain't over," he growled. "Yes," the stranger said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. "It is." The three brothers retreated into the shadows, their footsteps echoing off the empty buildings until they faded into the night. Only then did the stranger holster his weapon and turn his attention to Maggie, who stood trembling in the moonlight. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Maggie shook her head, then found her voice. "No, I thank you. I don't know what would have happened if." "No need to think on it," he said, kneeling to gather her scattered papers. "What's done is done." As he handed her the papers, their fingers brushed briefly, and Maggie noticed the calluses on his hands, working hands that had known both violence and honest labor. "I'm Margaret O'Brien," she said. "Everyone calls me Maggie." He touched the brim of his hat. "Pleased to meet you, Miss O'Brien. Name's Cole Hartwell. You're not from around here." It wasn't a question, and Cole smiled slightly, the first crack in his stoic facade. "No ma'am, just passing through." But as he looked at this brave woman who'd faced down three armed men with nothing but her dignity, something in Cole's carefully guarded heart stirred. Maybe, he thought, he wouldn't be passing through quite as quickly as he'd planned. Dawn broke over Millbrook with the promise of another scorching day, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and copper. Cole Hartwell sat on the porch of the town's only boarding house, a cup of bitter coffee growing cold in his hands as he watched the town come to life. He'd planned to be gone by sunrise, riding toward wherever the wind took him next, but something had changed his mind. Or rather, someone. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly proprietress of the boarding house, emerged with a plate of biscuits and eggs. "You sure you won't stay longer, Mr. Hartwell? Town could use a man like you." Cole accepted the plate with a nod of thanks. "Just a day or two, ma'am. Got some business to attend to." The old woman's eyes twinkled. "Business, is it? Wouldn't have anything to do with our schoolteacher, would it?" Before Cole could answer, the subject of their conversation appeared at the end of the street. Maggie walked with purpose toward the schoolhouse, a stack of books under her arm and her copper hair catching the morning light. She paused when she saw him, offering a shy smile before continuing on her way. "Thought so," Mrs. Henderson chuckled. "That girl's been alone too long since her PA died. Could use someone to look after her." Cole's jaw tightened. "I'm not the settling kind, ma'am." The old woman mused. "That's what they all say, until they find something worth settling for." After breakfast, Cole found himself walking toward the schoolhouse, telling himself he was just making sure the Donovan brothers hadn't caused any more trouble. Through the open window, he could hear Maggie's voice as she taught a handful of children their letters. Her voice was warm, patient, and filled with the kind of hope that Cole had thought died in him years ago. "Mr. Hartwell." He turned to find Maggie standing behind him, a concerned expression on her face. School had ended, while he'd been lost in thought. "Miss O'Brien, just wanted to make sure you were all right after last night." "I'm fine, thanks to you." She gestured toward the bench outside the schoolhouse. "Would you like to sit? I could use the company." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the desert heat shimmer in the distance. Finally, Maggie spoke. "You don't strike me as a drifter, Mr. Hartwell. There's something about you. You carry yourself like a man who's used to responsibility." Cole stared at his hands. "That was a long time ago. What happened?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Cole had never told anyone the full story, had carried the weight of it alone for 3 years. But something about this woman, her genuine concern, her lack of judgment made the words come easier than they ever had. "I was a sheriff," he said quietly. "Little town called Cedar Ridge, about 200 miles north of here. Had a wife, Emma, and a daughter, Lucy. She was 8 years old and had her mother's laugh." Maggie's heart clenched at the past tense. "What happened to them?" "The Garrett gang rode into town one day while I was out tracking rustlers. They robbed the bank, and when folks tried to stop them..." Cole's voice broke slightly. Emma had taken Lucy to deposit her birthday money. $5 she'd saved up all year to buy a doll she'd seen in the catalog. Maggie reached out instinctively, covering his hand with hers. "Oh, Cole. I found them when I got back to town." Emma had tried to shield Lucy, but he couldn't finish the sentence. "The town blamed me. Said if I'd been there, if I'd done my job, they'd still be alive. They were right." "No," Maggie said firmly. "You can't blame yourself for the actions of evil men." Cole pulled his hand away, standing abruptly. "I turned in my badge that day, and I've been riding ever since. Moving from town to town, trying to outrun the ghosts. Some things can't be forgiven, and some things don't need forgiveness," Maggie replied, rising to face him. "They need healing." The intensity in her green eyes made Cole's chest tight. This woman saw too much, understood too deeply. It would be so easy to let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find peace here. "I should go," he said. Should or want to? The question stopped him cold. What's the difference? Should is about running away. Want is about running toward something. Before Cole could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming down the main street at a leisurely pace, and Cole's blood ran cold as he recognized the leader, Frank Garrett, older brother of the man who'd destroyed his life. Maggie noticed the change in Cole immediately. "What is it?" "Trouble," Cole said grimly, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. "Go inside the schoolhouse and stay there. I won't hide in my own town, please." The word carried such weight that Maggie found herself backing toward the door. This isn't about bravery. It's about survival. Frank Garrett dismounted in front of the saloon, his 2 companions flanking him like wolves. Even from a distance, Cole could see the family resemblance, the same cold eyes, the same cruel smile that had haunted his nightmares. If you're enjoying this intense turn in the story, don't forget to hit that like button and let me know what you'd think in the comments. As if sensing Cole's gaze, Frank turned toward the schoolhouse. For a moment, their eyes met across the dusty street, and Cole saw a recognition flicker in the outlaw's face. Frank said something to his men, and all 3 began walking toward the school. Well, Frank called out when they were close enough to be heard clearly. "If it ain't the famous Sheriff Hartwell. Though I hear you ain't wearing a badge no more." Cole stepped into the street, putting himself between the outlaws and the schoolhouse. "Garrett, you remember me?" Frank grinned, showing gold teeth. "Course, you might remember my little brother Tom even better. Heard you killed him up in Yuma last month." "He drew first," Cole said simply. "That he did. Boy always was too quick on the trigger." Frank's expression hardened. Still, blood is blood, and blood demands blood. The street had gone silent around them. Shopkeepers ducked behind counters, and mothers pulled children inside. Word was spreading through Millbrook like wildfire. There was about to be a gunfight. "This is between us, Garrett," Cole said. "Leave the town out of it." "Oh, I intend to," Frank replied. "Soon as I finish what my brother started in Cedar Ridge." The words hit Cole like a physical blow. "You mean ... That's right, Sheriff. Tom always said you had a pretty wife and daughter. Said if he ever got the chance, he'd show you what it felt like to lose everything. Guess he got his chance after all." Rage, pure and white-hot, flooded through Cole's veins. For 3 years, he'd carried the guilt of not being there to protect his family. Now he learned their deaths hadn't been random violence. They'd been murdered specifically to hurt him. "Draw," Cole said, his voice deadly quiet. Frank laughed. "All in good time. Former sheriff, first, maybe we'll pay a visit to that pretty school teacher. Seems you got a weakness for taking care of women who can't protect themselves." That was the final straw. Cole's hand hovered over his gun, every muscle coiled and ready. Behind him, he could hear Maggie's sharp intake of breath from the schoolhouse doorway. "Last warning, Garrett, or what? You'll shoot me down like a dog in the street." Frank's grin widened. "Go ahead and try, hero. Let's see how fast that gun of yours really is." The moment stretched taut as a bowstring, 2 men facing each other in the blazing afternoon sun, while a town held its collective breath and waited for death to come calling. The silence stretched across Millbrook's main street like a held breath, broken only by the whisper of wind through the buildings and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Cole stood with his feet planted wide, his right hand hovering just inches from his gun grip, every nerve in his body focused on Frank Garrett's eyes. In gunfights, the eyes always gave away the moment before a man decided to draw. Frank's 2 companions had spread out slightly, creating a triangle with Cole at the center. The smart play would be to take Frank first. He was clearly the fastest then, swing left to right. But that assumed Cole would survive the first exchange, and Frank Garrett hadn't lived this long by being slow with a gun. "You know what your problem is, Hartwell," Frank said, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "You think you're some kind of hero. But heroes die just as easy as everyone else." "I'm no hero," Cole replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. "I'm just a man with nothing left to lose." "Oh, but that ain't true no more, is it?" Frank's eyes flicked briefly toward the schoolhouse where Maggie waited. "Seems to me you got something real pretty to lose right here in this dusty little town." The taunt hit its mark, but Cole didn't let it show. He'd learned long ago that emotion was a gunfighter's worst enemy. "Last chance to ride out, Garrett." "I don't think so." Frank's hand twitched, and Cole caught the telltale slight tension in the shoulders that meant a draw was coming. But before either man could move, a new voice cut across the street. "Hold it right there." Sheriff Daniels emerged from behind the general store, his deputy flanking him with a shotgun. The lawman was in his 50s, gray-haired and soft around the middle, but his voice carried authority. "Nobody's shooting up my town," Daniels called out. "You got beef with each other, take it outside the city limits." Frank never took his eyes off Cole. "This is between me and the former sheriff here, lawman. Best you stay out of it." "Like hell I will." Daniels stepped closer, his hand on his gun. "I said, move it along, and I meant it." In that moment of distraction, Cole saw his chance. His hand moved in a blur of practiced motion, the Colt clearing leather with deadly precision. But Frank was fast, too faster than his brother had been, and his gun came up simultaneously. Two shots cracked across the desert air in perfect synchronization. Frank Garrett staggered backward, a red stain spreading across his shirt front, but his gun was still in his hand. Cole felt fire lance through his left shoulder as Frank's bullet found its mark, spinning him partially around. If you're on the edge of your seat, drop a like and let me know in the comments what you think happens next. Before either man could fire again, Sheriff Daniels' voice boomed across the street. "Next man that moves gets a bellyful of buckshot." Frank's companions had their hands halfway to their guns, but froze at the sheriff's words. The deputy's shotgun was trained on them, and at this range, buckshot would cut a man in half. Frank looked down at the blood seeping between his fingers, where he pressed his hand to his chest. The wound was high, and to the right painful, but not immediately fatal. Cole's shoulder burned like fire, but his gun arm was still functional. "This ain't over," Frank gasped, his face pale, but his eyes still burning with hatred. "Yeah, it is," Cole said quietly. "Walk away, Garrett. Next time, I won't aim to wound." For a moment, it seemed like Frank might try to raise his gun again, but the sheriff stepped closer, his own weapon drawn. "You heard him," Daniels said. "Collect your men and ride out. And don't come back to my town." Frank looked around at the faces, watching from windows and doorways townspeople, who clearly sided with the stranger, who'd stood up to him. His companions were nervous, outnumbered, and outgunned. Slowly, he holstered his weapon. "Get the horses," he ordered his men. As the three outlaws mounted up, Frank fixed Cole with a stare that promised future violence. "This ain't over, Hartwell. Not by a long shot." They rode out at a gallop, heading north toward the Badlands where law was scarce, and justice scarcer. Only when they'd disappeared into the heat shimmer did the town collectively exhale. "Somebody get Doc Morrison," Sheriff Daniels called out, noticing the blood on Cole's shirt. But Maggie was already running toward them, her face white with concern. "How bad is it?" Cole looked down at his shoulder, testing the movement. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his shoulder, painful, but not crippling. "I'll live." "You need medical attention," Maggie insisted, slipping under his good arm to support him. "The doctor's office is just down the street." As they walked slowly toward Doc Morrison's practice, Sheriff Daniels fell into step beside them. "That was some pretty fancy shooting, Mr. Hartwell. Frank Garrett's killed 6 men in gunfights that I know of." "He's fast," Cole admitted, "but anger makes a man careless." "You saved this town a lot of trouble," the sheriff continued. "Men like that don't just ride through, they leave scars." Doc Morrison was a thin, precise man in his 60s who cleaned and dressed Cole's wound with practiced efficiency. The bullet had indeed passed clean through, missing bone and major blood vessels. "You're lucky," the doctor said as he worked. "An inch lower, and to the left, and you'd be measuring for a pine box right about now." "Story of my life," Cole muttered, then winced as the doctor applied antiseptic. Maggie had insisted on staying, despite the doctor's protests about propriety. She sat in a chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, but Cole could see the tension in her shoulders. "He'll be fine in a few days," Doc Morrison announced as he finished bandaging the wound. "Keep it clean and dry, and don't do anything foolish like getting into any more gunfight. I'll make sure he behaves," Maggie said firmly. After the doctor left, they sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Finally, Maggie spoke. "You could have been killed, but I wasn't. You stood up for this town. For me." Her voice was soft, filled with something Cole was afraid to identify. "Why?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the street where he'd nearly died. "I've spent 3 years running from the past, telling myself I didn't deserve a future. But when I saw you in danger, what? I remembered what it felt like to have something worth fighting for." Maggie's breath caught. "Cole, I know. I'm not much," he continued, the words coming harder now. "I'm a man with too many ghosts and too much blood on his hands. But if you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Help rebuild what those men tried to destroy." Maggie stood and moved to the window beside him, her hand finding his. "This town has a way of healing broken things," she said quietly. "Hearts, hopes, even the most stubborn of men." "Is that what you think I am? Stubborn?" She smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Among other things, outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, Frank Garrett was probably making plans for revenge. But for the first time in 3 years, Cole Hartwell wasn't thinking about running, he was thinking about staying. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Frank Garrett, and Millbrook had settled back into its quiet rhythm. Cole's shoulder had healed enough for him to move freely, though it still ached when the weather turned. More importantly, he'd found something he hadn't expected to find again: purpose. Sheriff Daniels had offered him a deputy's badge the day after the gunfight, but Cole had politely declined. The weight of a star brought back too many memories, too many failures. Instead, he'd found work at Henderson's stable, tending horses and helping travelers. It was honest work that didn't require him to make life and death decisions for other people. But even without a badge, folks had started coming to him with their problems. A dispute over property lines, cattle rustlers hitting the Morrison ranch, kids throwing rocks at Mrs. Chen's laundry. Small things, mostly, but Cole found himself stepping into the role of peacekeeper without even realizing it. This morning found him sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching Maggie walk toward the schoolhouse, as she did every day. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, like a plant taking root in desert soil. They shared meals, took evening walks, and talked about everything except the future. Both of them seemed afraid to put words to what was growing between them, as if speaking it aloud might make it disappear. "You're gonna wear a hole in those boards, staring after her like that," Mrs. Henderson said, emerging with his morning coffee. "Just enjoying the morning air," Cole replied, accepting the cup. "Uh-huh." The old woman settled into the rocking chair beside him. "You know, in all the years Maggie's been in this town, I've never seen her smile the way she does when she looks at you. She's a fine woman. She's more than that, and you know it." Mrs. Henderson fixed him with a knowing look. "Question is, what are you planning to do about it?" Before Cole could answer, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. 2 men were coming down the main street at an easy pace, and Cole tensed as he recognized the badges on their chests. U.S. Marshals. The riders stopped in front of the boarding house, and the older of the two dismounted. He was a tall, lean man with steel gray hair, and the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life enforcing law in hard places. "Morning," he said, touching his hat brim. "I'm Marshal Williams. This is Marshal Cody. We're looking for a man named Cole Hartwell." Mrs. Henderson shot a worried glance at Cole, but he stood calmly. "You found him? Mr. Hartwell, we'd like to have a word with you, if you don't mind." "About what?" Marshal Williams studied him for a moment. "About Frank Garrett and his gang. Mind if we sit?" They settled on the porch, and Williams pulled out a folded wanted poster. Cole wasn't surprised to see Frank Garrett's face staring back at him, along with a substantial reward. "Garrett and his boys hit a bank in Tucson 2 days ago," Williams explained. "Killed a teller and wounded 2 customers. But that's not why we're here." "Then why are you here?" "Because we've been tracking Garrett for 6 months, and every witness who's seen him describes the same thing. He's looking for someone he calls the sheriff. Took us a while to piece together that he meant you." Cole's jaw tightened. "What do you want from me?" "Your help." Marshal Cody spoke for the first time. He was younger than his partner, with intense blue eyes. Garrett's building a gang, recruiting men with grudges against the law. He's planning something big, and he's using your name to do it. How so? He's telling potential recruits that he's got a personal score to settle with the famous Sheriff Hartwell. Williams explained. Says once he kills you, he'll be respected enough to lead the biggest gang in the territory. Cole stood and walked to the porch railing, staring out at the peaceful street. Behind him, he could hear Mrs. Henderson's sharp intake of breath. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help us set a trap, Williams said. Garrett wants you dead, and he's not going to stop until he gets his chance. We can use that. You want me as bait? We want to end this before more innocent people get hurt, Cody said firmly. Garrett's already killed 12 people in the last 6 months. How many more have to die before he gets to you? The words hit harder than Cole expected. He'd thought he could escape his past by coming to Millbrook, but the past had followed him anyway. Now his presence was putting the entire town at risk. I need time to think about it, he said finally. Of course, Williams nodded. But don't take too long. Our informants say Garrett's planning to move within the week. After the marshals left, Cole sat alone on the porch, wrestling with the decision before him. He could ride out with the marshals, help them capture Garrett, and probably end the threat forever. But it would mean leaving Millbrook, leaving Maggie, and returning to a world of violence he'd tried so hard to escape. You're thinking about going with them. He turned to find Maggie standing at the bottom of the porch steps, her face pale but determined. How long were you listening? Long enough. She climbed the steps and sat beside him. You think it's your duty to stop this man? He's my responsibility. If I hadn't killed his brother was an outlaw and a murderer. Maggie interrupted. You did what you had to do. That doesn't make you responsible for Frank Garrett's choices. Leave a comment below about what you think Cole should do and protect the town, or go with the marshals to end this once and for all. Cole was quiet for a long moment. If I stay, he'll come here eventually. This town will become a battleground, and if you go, you might not come back. The simple statement hung between them, carrying all the weight of words they'd never spoken aloud. Cole turned to look at her, seeing his own fears reflected in her green eyes. Maggie, I don't. She placed her hand over his. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep. Just be honest with me. What does your heart tell you to do? Cole looked out at the town that had become his home, the school where Maggie taught children to read, the stable where he'd found honest work, the streets where people nodded and smiled when they saw him. 3 weeks ago, these had been strangers. Now they felt like family. My heart tells me to stay, he said quietly, to build something here with you. But my head tells me that as long as Garrett's alive, neither of us will ever truly be safe. Maggie squeezed his hand. Then maybe it's time to listen to both. What do you mean? She stood, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. I mean, maybe the solution isn't choosing between staying or going. Maybe it's about making sure you come back. That evening, Cole found Marshal Williams at the saloon, nursing a whiskey and studying a map. The lawman looked up as Cole approached. Made your decision yet? Cole pulled out a chair and sat down. I'll help you get Garrett, but on one condition, which is, we do it here. In Millbrook. Williams frowned. That puts civilians at risk. Everywhere puts civilians at risk with a man like Garrett. At least here, I know the terrain. I know the people. And I know they'll stand with us when the time comes. The marshal considered this, then nodded slowly. What did you have in mind? Cole leaned forward, his voice low but intense. Garrett wants me dead, and he wants to do it publicly, to build his reputation. So we give him what he wants, a chance. At the famous Sheriff Hartwell, in a place where everyone can see a trap. The biggest trap the territory's ever seen. Cole's eyes hardened with resolve, and when the dust settles, Frank Garrett's reign of terror ends permanently. Williams smiled grimly and raised his glass. To the end of Frank Garrett. As they clinked glasses, neither man noticed the shadow at the saloon window wore the way. It slipped away into the night, carrying word of their conversation to ears that had been waiting to hear exactly these kinds of plans. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine not just Cole's future, but the future of everyone in Millbrook. In 3 days, Frank Garrett would come calling, and this time, only one man would ride away. But as Cole walked back to the boarding house, under a canopy of desert stars, his thoughts weren't on gunfights or glory. They were on a copperhead schoolteacher who'd taught him that some things were worth fighting for and, even more, worth living for. The Old West was changing, slowly but surely. Towns like Millbrook were proof that civilization could take root even in the harshest soil. All it needed was people brave enough to tend it, nurture it, and defend it when necessary. Tomorrow would bring preparation for battle. But tonight, Cole Hartwell was simply a man walking home to the closest thing to happiness he'd known in years, ready to fight for the future he'd never dared to dream possible. And there you have it, a tale of redemption, courage, and unexpected love set against the unforgiving backdrop of the American frontier. Cole Hartwell's journey from haunted drifter to reluctant hero shows us that sometimes our greatest strength comes not from running away from our past, but from finding something in the present worth fighting for. What did you think of this story? Which moments stood out to you? The most Cole's dramatic rescue of Maggie, the intense gunfight with Frank Garrett, or perhaps the quiet moments where two broken souls began to heal each other? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let's discuss this tale of the Old West. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures. Whether it's tales from the frontier, stories of courage and redemption, or other captivating narratives, there's always something new waiting for you here on the channel. Until next time, keep those spirits high and those stories